which flavor that user likes in a shop or a coffee shop, etc. So for the same, we have a data that is, let's just import that data first. So import pandas, and let's import our CSV file, and the CSV file will be in the resources, so download that from there. That is flavors.csv. then let's view it as well. So I think flavor, okay, so we have flavor.csv in our cell, and you can see that we have at least 20 columns, 20 rows and 3 columns with age, gender and flavor. So this is a sample data set of some customers with their age, gender and which flavor they like. So using this data set, you have to create a machine learning model or classifier that will classify when the age and gender is passed into a flavor, so which flavor that user will like. So let's create the same. So let's take a look at the data set. That you can see that we have age, the smallest as 6 and the maximum as 24. So let's check its range. So we can do so using data, then our age dot minimum, and let's call in, the first will be the maximum, then the same, that is data age dot minimum. So okay, we have the range in the age as 18 in our data set, so that's fine. And then we have some 20 samples, so we can just check that by length of the data, and we can just pass in anything. So let's just pass in age for now. So we have 20 samples, so that's fine because we are doing a small scale classification, that is the user age and gender into a flavor. That is a lot of flavors in here. So let's encode the values. That is, you can see that we have male and female that are string values in the gender column, which will be provided as an input. So every value in an input should be in a numeric value to help the machine learning model to learn better, or it is necessary to do that. That's why we have to change this or encode this labels or strings into numeric values. So for the same, let's import from sklearn dot preprocessing. Let's import the label encoder we used in the previous lesson. So label encoder, and now we want to encode this values. So for that, let's create an encoder object. So label encoder, and then let's fit it with the data. That is, we have only male and female in here, so we can just pass in that. That is a list with male and then female. So make sure to spell them correct as they are in the values, and keep this encoder in a separate cell. So okay, we have this in a separate cell, and why we're doing this I will tell you later. So run the cell, we have our encoder ready, and now in here let's just encode the values. So let's extract the values from data, gender, and then we will change those values using the encode transform, and then let's pass in the values, that is data gender. And now we can just look at the data again. So let's just run this cell first, values are encoded onto a new cell. Let's view our data again. So now you can see the genders are numeric value as well, that is 1 and 0. So why I created this into 2 different cells, let me tell you. So if we insert this in the upper cell and run this, you can see we get an error, that is y contains previously unseen labels, that is 0 and 1. So we have created an encoder with the values male and female, so it knows that if there is a male value, it will change it to a numerical value that is inside this encoder, and the female to a specific value that will be 0 and 1 of course, but it has now 0 and 1 because we have encoded the values previously. That's why we get something like this. So whenever you're creating an encoder and encoding the value, separate them into different cells to not raise this error, because if you ever want to change the encoder in the future, you will just change it in the cell and then encode it in another cell. So let's run the first cell again if you got this error, that is, let's store the data set again in the data. So let's not view this again. Okay, we have that, create the encoder and then encode the values, and now we can view the cells. So we have the gender values encoded. Perfect. So now we can separate this data set into training and output sets. So you can see that we have the age and gender as input and the flavor as output. So let's do that. So let's create a input. So let's just create X as a notification for the input. So we have data, the drop method, and in that we want to drop the columns, which is one column in here in the input because we want the age and gender, or let me rephrase it, we just don't want the flavor in the input. So let's just pass in that flavor, and then for the output we don't want the age and gender, so we have to pass that. So data drop columns, we don't want the age and we don't want the gender. So okay, let's run the cell. Data is divided into input and output. You can preview that. So let's X, we have age and gender, perfect. Y, flavors. So now we can move on to the next step, that is creating the model and then asking to make predictions. So we have our data ready and now we can create our model as well. So let's create that. So let's import the algorithm for that. So we're gonna use the sklearn tree, and from there let's import decision tree classifier, and make sure to spell it correct as always. And then let's create our classification model. So let's name it C model, and then our decision tree classifier, and then let's train it with the input and the output, or the training set we created, that is X and Y. Just run the cell and our decision tree classifier is created. That is, we have our classification model that can classify. If we provide the age and gender of a person, it will provide us or predict which flavor the person likes. So let's predict some values, or ask the model to predict some values. So let's use the predict method, and in here we need to pass a 2D array, and inside of that we'll have the values inside of 1D array. So first value is the age, so we can pass something, let's say 18, and then we need to pass male or female. So in here you can see that we pass fit, but let's say if we pass in something like male in here, we'll get an error. That is, we need to change this into a numeric value. So how do we do that? So for that same purpose, let's create a variable like age and just store gender. So we have not created them, let's create that. So let's say we have a age 12 or 18 as we had, and then gender, and then we'll use our encoder, and as we did transformed or encoded the values, we'll do the same, that is transform. Then we will pass in a value inside of list. So let's say we want the male to be transformed, then we can just pass in that here, and now we can run this. So you can see that we get mango. So a person with age 18 and male will like mango. So in here you can see that we use the encoder, that is the encoder we created in here using the label encoder, and we pass a male and female as the encoded values or the labels, and then in here we use the same encoder and transform this male value to pass it for predictions to our classification model. We can do the opposite, that is transform a numerical value into a male or labels using the reverse transform function. So let's say you want to transform reverse, that is change a numeric value to its label. We can do same. So the encoder call in reverse transform. So as it sounds, we will transform in the reverse direction. So let's say we pass something like 1 inside of a list, run this. So okay, I think it's inverse transform, so inverse transform, and yeah, that's it. So it is inverse function, my bad. So encoder has a inverse transform method. Here you can pass in a numerical value that is in your dataset, and it will tell which it stands for. So 1 stands for male, and here we can pass in something like 0 stands for female. So if we pass something that is not encoded or that is beyond the scope of our dataset, let's say we pass something like 2, we'll get an error. That is, it is not in your dataset. Why? It contains previously unseen labels, so it has not seen this label or numeric value in our dataset. So likewise, you can use the inverse transform to see which value stands for what. So let's delete this cell, and now you can see that we have our C model that is ready to make predictions. So in the next lesson, let's create a function to create a user prompt where we can just pass in age, then the gender, and it can just tell us what is the flavor that user likes. So see you in the next lesson.